In this video, we're going to take a look at the email list application. We've seen examples of this in previous chapters. We're going to take a look at this and see how we might write this with jQuery and make it a little bit easier. So if you remember this, it wants us to type our email address twice to confirm it and add our name, and then click the Join List button. If we click it and any of these are empty, remember there's a little span over here on the right side where an error message pops up. When we click the clear form, it goes back. It has the red asterisks there. So let's take a look at the code for this. Here's our index.html page. So we have our H1 for please join our list. We have our form with the ID of email form. Action is join.html. So once it gets submitted, it's going to pull up the join.html page, which just says thanks for joining our email list. So we have a div label for email address, and then we have a text box coded for somebody to type in their email address, and then right next to the text box we have a span element, and each of these three is the same. We have one for email 1, another one for email 2, another div for first name with a text box, and then at the very bottom we have another div where we're using nothing for the label, non-breaking space. This is what that stands for. So it's just a space in the label so that it holds the position. Input type is a button for joining the list, and then another button for clearing the form. At the very bottom, I want to pay attention to this. We have our script tag that loads jQuery and is loading it from jQuery.com. It's actually loading the slim version. We're not using Ajax or any of the special features, so the slim version is fine in this case. So we're getting the slim.min.js file. And then we have our script called email_list.js. It is important because email_list.js is making use of jQuery. jQuery needs to be loaded first. So we put the script to load jQuery followed by our script. That ensures that this will load before ours tries to run. So let's take a look at the magic. What are we doing in here? Well, first we're getting references to the two email boxes, okay? And we're using the dollar function to get the ID of email1.val. So we're using the selector and the val method to get the value out of email 1 and store it in email. That's a little shorter than what we've had to do in the past. Same thing for email 2. Use the email 2 ID selector, get its value, store it in email 2. And then we're going to assume that everything is valid until we find out that it's not. Okay, so we're checking to see if email 1 is blank. And if email 1 is blank, we're saying, okay, take email 1, find the next element after it, which is the span, and set its text property to this field as required. That's a lot shorter than what we had to do in the past with next element sibling and all those things. It's much shorter. Okay, so if it was blank, we're setting the error message and changing is valid to false. If it was valid, we're changing that same thing. Email 1's next element, which is the span. That was my dog flapping her ears. Please ignore her. Email 1, next element, which is the span, we're setting the text property to blank. We're getting rid of the asterisk because they had obviously filled out the field. Second validation, we're checking to see if email 2 is blank. And then we're getting the next element next to it, if it's blank, and saying this field is required. Then we're also checking to see if email 1 and email 2 are equal, making sure they type the same thing in both boxes. If they didn't, we're updating the same thing next to the email 2 field. We're getting that span and setting its text element to the email addresses must match. So if either one of those things are true, we're setting is valid to false. If they both are good, then we're getting rid of the asterisk and setting the span to a blank. Okay. And then we're doing something very similar, getting the value of the first name box. If it's blank, say this field is required, set is valid to false. As long as all these pass and invalid never gets set to false, we're calling the email form and .submit. We're submitting the form. All right. So that's how that works. We also have the reset button. So if they click on the clear form reset button on the .click method, we have email 1's value gets set to a blank, email 2's value gets set to a blank, first name gets set to a blank, and then we also set email 1's next element and email 2's next element and first name's next element, which is all the spans next to those boxes. We're setting them all to the asterisk button. Okay. And then we're setting the focus back to email 1 so they can start over. Okay. And at the very end, when the form first loads, we set the focus as well. So a little bit shorter, a little bit easier to read using jQuery for this application. I think easier to understand as well.